Question 1. Market research demonstrates that clients often express a strong desire for specific, high-growth investments. In Ontario, a financial advisor is approached by a prospective client who is eager to invest a significant portion of their savings in a particular technology stock, citing its recent surge in value. The advisor has not yet conducted a full Know Your Client (KIC) assessment, which approach best aligns with the regulatory framework and ethical obligations under the Ontario Securities Commission (OSC). Option A. Conduct a comprehensive KYC assessment, including a detailed review of the client's financial situation, investment objectives, risk tolerance, and investment knowledge, before making any recommendation or proceeding with the investment. Option B. Advise the client to consult with an independent financial planner to assess the suitability of this specific stock before the advisor proceeds with any transaction. Option C. Recommend the client invest a smaller, speculative amount in the stock, acknowledging their interest but without a full KYC assessment, to allow them to participate in the potential gains. Option D. Proceed with the investment as requested by the client, given their expressed enthusiasm and the stock's recent performance, to meet their immediate investment goals. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive KYC assessment, including a detailed review of the client's financial situation, investment objectives, risk tolerance, and investment knowledge, before making any recommendation or proceeding with the investment. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate needs of a client with the stringent regulatory requirements of the Ontario Securities Commission (OSC) regarding suitability and Know Your Client (KIC) obligations. A financial advisor must act in the client's best interest, which includes understanding their financial situation, investment objectives, risk tolerance, and knowledge of investments. Failing to do so can lead to significant regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and harm to the client. The best professional practice involves a thorough and documented understanding of the client's financial profile before recommending any investment. This approach prioritizes the client's well-being and adheres strictly to OSC Rule 31-505, registration requirements, conduct of business and reporting, and related guidance, which mandates that registrants must ensure that any recommendation made is suitable for the client. This includes assessing their financial situation, investment objectives, risk tolerance, and knowledge of investments. Documenting this assessment is crucial for demonstrating compliance and protecting both the client and the advisor. Recommending an investment without a comprehensive understanding of the client's financial situation and risk tolerance is a significant regulatory failure. It violates the fundamental principle of suitability, potentially exposing the client to investments they cannot afford or understand, and contravenes OSC requirements to act in the client's best interest. Proceeding with an investment based solely on the client's expressed desire, without verifying their capacity to absorb potential losses or understanding their broader financial context, is also a failure. While client wishes are important, they do not override the advisor's duty to ensure suitability and compliance with OSC regulations. This approach risks misrepresenting the client's risk profile and could lead to unsuitable investments. Suggesting the client seek advice from another professional without first conducting the necessary due diligence yourself is an abdication of professional responsibility. While collaboration can be valuable, the primary obligation to assess suitability rests with the advisor who is engaging with the client. This approach fails to meet the advisor's direct regulatory obligations under OSC rules. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with a comprehensive KYC process, including detailed financial and risk assessment. This information should be thoroughly documented. Recommendations should then be directly linked to this documented profile, ensuring suitability. Any deviation or uncertainty should trigger further investigation or a refusal to proceed until compliance is assured. The advisor must always prioritize regulatory compliance and the client's best interest over expediency or client pressure. Question 2. Market research demonstrates that clients often express a desire for rapid investment growth. As a registered financial advisor in Ontario, how should you respond when a client states they are looking for investments that will generate quick returns, considering the regulatory framework of the Ontario Securities Commission (OSC)? Option A. Engage in a detailed discussion to understand the client's underlying reasons for seeking quick returns. Assess their capacity for risk and recommend investments that align with their overall financial situation and objectives, even if they carry higher risk, provided they are suitable. Option B. Immediately recommend a highly speculative, high-risk investment product that is known for its potential for rapid gains, as this directly addresses the client's stated desire. Option C. Proceed with recommending a diversified portfolio of established blue-chip stocks, assuming that quick returns is a general term for any positive market performance. Option D. Politely decline to discuss any investments that could be perceived as offering quick returns, explaining that your firm only deals in conservative, long-term investments. The correct answer is A. Engage in a detailed discussion to understand the client's underlying reasons for seeking quick returns, assess their capacity for risk, and recommend investments that align with their overall financial situation and objectives, even if they carry higher risk, provided they are suitable. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate needs of a client with the stringent regulatory requirements of the Ontario Securities Commission (OSC) regarding suitability. The advisor must act in the client's best interest while adhering to the OSC's rules, which mandate that recommendations must be suitable based on the client's financial situation, investment objectives, risk tolerance, and knowledge. The challenge lies in interpreting the client's stated desire for quick returns and ensuring that any recommendation aligns with their overall financial well-being, not just a short-term speculative wish. The best approach involves a thorough suitability assessment that prioritizes the client's stated objectives and risk tolerance, while also considering their broader financial picture. This means engaging in a detailed discussion to understand the underlying reasons for the desire for quick returns, exploring their actual capacity to absorb potential losses, and then recommending investments that, while potentially offering faster growth, are still within the bounds of what is suitable for their circumstances. This aligns directly with OSC Rule 1302.1, which states that a registrant must not make a recommendation that is not suitable for a client. It also upholds the ethical obligation to act with integrity and in the client's best interest, as outlined in industry codes of conduct. Recommending a high-risk, speculative product solely based on the client's mention of quick returns, without a comprehensive suitability assessment, is professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the OSC's suitability requirements and breaches the ethical duty to protect the client from undue risk. Prioritizes a superficial interpretation of the client's request over their actual financial well-being. Another unacceptable approach is to dismiss the client's request outright and refuse to discuss any investments that might offer faster growth. While caution is necessary, an outright refusal without understanding the client's motivations or exploring potentially suitable, albeit higher risk, options can be perceived as paternalistic and may alienate the client, preventing them from seeking advice elsewhere where they might receive less scrupulous guidance. This approach fails to adequately explore the client's needs and objectives. Finally, proceeding with a recommendation without fully understanding the client's financial situation and risk tolerance, even if the product itself is not inherently unsuitable for all investors, is also professionally unsound. The advisor has a duty to gather all necessary information to make an informed recommendation. Without this, any recommendation is speculative and potentially harmful. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with understanding the client's stated needs and objectives. This should be followed by a comprehensive fact-finding process to gather information on their financial situation, risk tolerance, and investment knowledge. Based on this complete picture, the professional then identifies suitable investment options that align with the client's profile and regulatory requirements. Open communication and a willingness to educate the client about the risks and potential rewards of different investment strategies are crucial throughout the process. Question 3. The efficiency study reveals that processing driver's license renewals in Kildare is taking longer than desired, leading to increased applicant wait times. A proposal is made to streamline the process by allowing applicants who have renewed their licenses in the past 5 years and have no reported vision issues to bypass the mandatory vision test, thereby reducing administrative burden and improving turnaround times. Considering the regulatory framework of Kildare, which approach best balances efficiency with public safety. Option A. Waive the vision test for applicants who have renewed their licenses in the past 5 years and have no reported vision issues, as this group is statistically less likely to have significant vision changes. Option B. Strictly enforce the Kildare Highway Traffic Act's requirement for a vision test for all driver's license renewals, regardless of previous renewal history or reported issues, ensuring compliance with driver fitness standards. Option C. Authorize administrative staff who are not certified vision testers to conduct the vision tests to speed up the process. Option D. Implement a self-declaration system where applicants simply affirm their vision is adequate for driving without a formal test. The correct answer is B. Strictly enforce the Kildare Highway Traffic Act's requirement for a vision test for all driver's license renewals, regardless of previous renewal history or reported issues, ensuring compliance with driver fitness standards. Explanation: the efficiency study reveals a potential conflict between the Kildare Department of Motor Vehicles (DMV) mandate to process driver's license renewals promptly and the need to ensure road safety through thorough vision testing. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing administrative efficiency with public safety obligations, a common tension in government service. The pressure to reduce wait times could tempt staff to cut corners on essential safety checks. The best approach involves prioritizing the integrity of the driver's license renewal process by strictly adhering to the Kildare Highway Traffic Act, specifically Section 45, regarding driver fitness and vision standards. This approach mandates that all applicants must pass a vision test administered by a certified technician or optometrist as part of the renewal process, regardless of administrative pressures or perceived efficiency gains. This ensures that only individuals meeting the minimum vision requirements for safe driving are issued or renew their licenses, directly fulfilling the DMV's core public safety mandate. This is correct because it upholds the letter and spirit of the law designed to protect all road users in Kildare. An incorrect approach would be to waive the vision test for applicants who have renewed their licenses in the past and have no reported vision issues. This fails to comply with Section 45 of the Kildare Highway Traffic Act, which does not provide an exemption for repeat applicants. It creates a regulatory loophole that compromises road safety by potentially allowing drivers with deteriorating vision to continue operating vehicles without proper assessment. Another incorrect approach would be to implement a self-declaration system where applicants simply attest to their vision being adequate without any verification. This bypasses the statutory requirement for a formal vision test and undermines the DMV's responsibility to verify driver fitness. It relies on the applicant's subjective assessment, which may not accurately reflect their actual visual acuity and ability to drive safely, thereby violating the spirit of the law and potentially leading to increased accidents. Third incorrect approach would be to outsource vision testing to unqualified administrative staff who are not certified to conduct such assessments. This is a direct violation of the professional standards and likely the specific regulations governing vision testing for driver's licenses in Kildare, which would necessitate certified personnel. It compromises the accuracy and reliability of the vision test results, rendering the renewal process invalid from a safety perspective. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core legal and ethical obligations. In this case, the primary obligation is to uphold the Kildare Highway Traffic Act and ensure public safety. When faced with competing pressures, such as efficiency targets, professionals must first consult the relevant legislation and departmental policies. If there is ambiguity, seeking clarification from legal counsel or senior management is crucial. The decision must always prioritize compliance with the law and the safeguarding of public interest over administrative convenience or perceived efficiency gains. Question 4. Market research demonstrates that some prospective drivers in Kildare are anxious about their upcoming driving test and seek instructors who can guarantee a pass. A driving instructor in Kildare, who is also friends with a prospective client, is approached by this client, who specifically requests training focused only on the maneuvers they found difficult in a previous failed test, believing this is the most efficient way to pass. How should the instructor prioritize their professional obligations? Option A. Clearly explain that the primary goal is to ensure the client is a safe and competent driver according to the official Kildare driver testing syllabus, and that training will cover all required skills comprehensively, not just specific maneuvers. Option B. Agree to focus exclusively on the maneuvers the client identified as problematic. as this is what the client believes will lead to a pass and will likely retain their business. Option C suggests that certain parts of the official Kildare driver testing syllabus are less critical and can be given minimal attention to save time and focus on the client's perceived weak points. Option D. Advise the client on subtle techniques to impress the examiner and manage their perception, without necessarily focusing on improving underlying driving skills. The correct answer is A. Clearly explain that the primary goal is to ensure the client is a safe and competent driver according to the official Kildare driver testing syllabus, and that training will cover all required skills comprehensively, not just specific maneuvers. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Kildare driving instructor due to the potential conflict between client satisfaction and adherence to the strict regulatory framework governing driver testing in Kildare. The instructor must navigate the client's desire for a specific outcome with the ethical and legal obligation to prepare the client for a genuine assessment of their driving ability, without compromising the integrity of the testing process. The pressure to retain a client, especially one who is a friend, can cloud judgment, making a robust decision-making process crucial. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves clearly communicating to the client that the driving test in Kildare is a standardized assessment of their ability to drive safely and legally, and that the instructor's role is to prepare them for this assessment. This means focusing on teaching all necessary skills and knowledge according to the official Kildare driver testing syllabus, rather than tailoring instruction to exploit perceived loopholes or to simply pass the test through superficial means. The instructor must emphasize that genuine competency is the ultimate goal, which aligns with the Road Safety Authority's (RSA) mandate to ensure public safety on Kildare's roads. This approach upholds the ethical duty of the instructor to act in the best interest of both the client and the wider public by ensuring only competent drivers are licensed. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves agreeing to focus solely on the specific maneuvers the client feels they struggled with previously, to the exclusion of other essential driving skills and knowledge required by the Kildare driver testing syllabus. This fails to provide comprehensive preparation and may lead to the client being unprepared for aspects of the test not covered, or worse, developing a false sense of security. It also undermines the purpose of the test, which is to assess overall driving competence, not just a subset of skills. Another incorrect approach is to subtly guide the client on how to manage the examiner's expectations or to suggest ways to present their driving in a manner that might be perceived favorably, without necessarily improving their actual driving ability. This borders on unethical practice, as it attempts to manipulate the testing process rather than prepare the client for an objective evaluation. It compromises the integrity of the Kildare driver testing system and could result in a licensed driver who is not truly safe. A further incorrect approach is to downplay the importance of certain aspects of the syllabus, suggesting they are less likely to be tested or are of minor concern. This misinforms the client and fails to equip them with the full range of knowledge and skills necessary for safe driving and successful completion of the test in Kildare. It demonstrates a lack of commitment to the official curriculum and a disregard for the potential consequences of incomplete preparation. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Kildare should adopt a framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Understanding and internalizing the official Kildare driver testing syllabus and all relevant RSA guidelines. 2. Maintaining open and honest communication with clients about the purpose of the test and the instructor's role. 3. Developing a training plan that comprehensively addresses all aspects of the syllabus. 4. Resisting any pressure to compromise professional standards for client convenience or perceived short-term gain. 5. Continuously updating knowledge of any changes to the testing procedures or syllabus. Question 5. Market research demonstrates that some prospective drivers in Kildare believe they can pass their driving test by focusing only on a few key maneuvers they deem most challenging, and that instructors should tailor their lessons accordingly. As a driving instructor in Kildare, how should you respond to a client who expresses this view and requests that you prioritize only those specific maneuvers, suggesting that other syllabus components can be de-emphasized? Option A. Inform the client that you will only teach them the maneuvers they are most concerned about, as this is what they are paying for, and it is their responsibility to pass the test. Option B. suggests that you can teach them shortcuts or less rigorous methods for certain syllabus components, as examiners in Kildare are often lenient with minor deviations. Option C. Agree to focus primarily on the client's preferred maneuvers, downplaying the importance of other syllabus topics to expedite their perceived readiness for the test. Option D. Explain that, while you can provide extra practice on their most challenging maneuvers, all aspects of the Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency (DVSA) syllabus for the Kildare driving test must be covered comprehensively to ensure full preparation. The correct answer is D. Explain that, while you can provide extra practice on their most challenging maneuvers, all aspects of the Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency (DVSA) syllabus for the Kildare driving test must be covered comprehensively to ensure full preparation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Kildare driving instructor due to the potential conflict between client satisfaction and adherence to the strict requirements of the Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency (DVSA) syllabus for the Kildare driving test. The instructor must navigate the client's desire for a perceived shortcut with the absolute necessity of ensuring the client is fully prepared according to official standards, which could lead to client dissatisfaction if their expectations are not met. Careful judgment is required to balance client relationships with professional integrity and legal obligations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves clearly communicating to the client that the Kildare driving test syllabus, as mandated by the DVSA, is the sole determinant of what is covered and assessed. The instructor must explain that, while they can tailor practice sessions to address specific weaknesses, they cannot deviate from or omit any part of the official syllabus to accommodate a client's perceived need for speed or a shortcut. This approach is correct because it upholds the instructor's professional duty to prepare the client for the test according to the established regulatory framework. It ensures that the client receives comprehensive instruction aligned with DVSA standards, thereby maximizing their chances of passing the test legitimately and safely. This aligns with the DVSA objective of ensuring all drivers are competent and safe on the road. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves agreeing to focus only on the elements the client believes are most important, even if it means skipping certain syllabus topics. This is professionally unacceptable because it directly violates the instructor's obligation to cover the entire DVSA syllabus. It risks presenting the client for the test without adequate preparation in all required areas, potentially leading to failure and, more importantly, a lack of essential driving skills. This also undermines the integrity of the testing process. Another incorrect approach is to suggest that the client can practice certain maneuvers in a way that deviates from the precise standards outlined in the DVSA syllabus, with the understanding that the examiner might not notice or might overlook minor discrepancies. This is ethically and regulatorily unsound. It encourages a disregard for the official testing standards and could lead to the client developing unsafe driving habits. Furthermore, it places the instructor in a position of potentially misleading the client and the examiner, which is a serious breach of professional conduct. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Kildare should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. When faced with client demands that conflict with established standards, the first step is to clearly understand the client's underlying concern. Next, the professional must consult the relevant regulatory framework, in this case, the DVSA syllabus for the Kildare driving test, to identify the precise requirements. The professional should then communicate these requirements to the client in a clear, transparent, and empathetic manner, explaining why adherence is essential for both passing the test and for safe driving. If the client's request cannot be accommodated within the regulatory framework, the professional should offer alternative solutions that remain compliant, such as focusing on specific areas of difficulty within the syllabus or suggesting additional practice time. The ultimate goal is to ensure the client is well prepared according to official standards, even if it means managing client expectations regarding the timeline or scope of instruction. Question 6. The control framework reveals that Mr. O'Malley, a Kildare resident, has recently been diagnosed with a medical condition. He's applying to renew his driver's license. Considering the paramount importance of public safety and the regulatory requirements in Ireland, which of the following actions best represents the appropriate professional response? Option A. Obtain a detailed medical report from Mr. O'Malley's physician, and if necessary, Require a driving assessment by an approved professional to determine his fitness to drive, in accordance with the Road Traffic Act 2010 and NDLS guidelines. Option B. Grant the license renewal immediately, assuming the condition does not significantly impair his driving ability. Option C. Base the decision on the opinion of a family member who is aware of Mr. O'Malley's condition and driving habits. Option D. Automatically deny the license renewal based on the diagnosis alone, without further medical review or assessment. The correct answer is A. Obtain a detailed medical report from Mr. O'Malley's physician, and if necessary, require a driving assessment by an approved professional to determine his fitness to drive, in accordance with the Road Traffic Act 2010 and NDLS guidelines. Explanation. The control framework reveals a situation where a Kildare resident, Mr. O'Malley, is seeking to renew his driver's license. He has recently been diagnosed with a medical condition that could potentially affect his driving ability. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the individual's right to mobility and independence with the paramount public safety interest. The licensing authority in Kildare must make a judgment that is both legally compliant and ethically sound, ensuring that only safe drivers are permitted on the road. Careful judgment is required to avoid both unnecessary restrictions on Mr. O'Malley and potential risks to other road users. The best approach involves a thorough and objective assessment of Mr. O'Malley's medical condition and its specific impact on his driving capabilities, in accordance with the Road Traffic Act 2010, as amended, and relevant medical guidelines issued by the National Driver Licence Service, NDLS, in Ireland. This approach necessitates obtaining a detailed medical report from Mr. O'Malley's treating physician, specifically addressing his fitness to drive. If the medical report indicates potential concerns, the licensing authority should then require Mr. O'Malley to undergo a driving assessment by an approved driving instructor or a medical professional with expertise in driver fitness. This ensures that the decision is based on current, evidence-based information and adheres to the established procedures for medical fitness to drive in Ireland, prioritizing public safety while respecting individual circumstances. An incorrect approach would be to automatically deny the license renewal based solely on the diagnosis without further investigation. This fails to acknowledge the nuances of medical conditions and their varying impacts on driving ability, potentially infringing on Mr. O'Malley's rights without due process. It also contravenes the principle of individualized assessment mandated by the Road Traffic Act 2010. Another incorrect approach would be to grant the renewal without any medical review, despite being aware of a potentially impairing medical condition. This directly jeopardizes public safety and violates the licensing authority's duty to ensure all drivers meet the required medical standards as outlined by the NDLS. Finally, relying on anecdotal information or the opinion of someone other than a qualified medical professional or approved assessor to determine fitness to drive would be professionally unacceptable, as it lacks the necessary objectivity and regulatory backing. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance, public safety, and fairness. This involves 1. Identifying the relevant legal and regulatory framework, e.g., Road Traffic Act 2010, NDLS guidelines. 2. Gathering all necessary objective information, including medical reports and, if required, professional assessments. 3. Applying established criteria for driver fitness to the gathered information. 4. Making a decision that is demonstrably justified by the evidence and compliant with regulations. 5. Communicating the decision and any required next steps clearly to the applicant. Question 7. System analysis indicates a driving instructor in Kildare is conducting a lesson with a learner who has demonstrated a pattern of minor, but consistent, infractions such as slightly exceeding the speed limit on residential roads or making turns that are a fraction too wide. Considering the instructor's responsibility to ensure road safety and adherence to Kildare's traffic laws, what is the most appropriate immediate course of action? Option A. Overlook these minor infractions, assuming the learner will naturally improve their driving habits as they gain more experience. Option B. React with frustration and sternly reprimand the learner to emphasize the seriousness of their actions. Option C. Immediately end the lesson and report the learner's behavior to the Kildare Driving Test Center without further intervention. Option D. Safely pull over when feasible. Calmly explain the specific infractions. Reference relevant driving principles or Kildare Road Traffic Act guidelines, and provide constructive feedback for correction. The correct answer is D. Safely pull over when feasible, calmly explain the specific infractions, reference relevant driving principles or Kildare Road Traffic Act guidelines, and provide constructive feedback for correction. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Kildare driving instructor regarding the appropriate handling of a learner driver's persistent, minor traffic violations during a lesson. The instructor must balance the immediate need to ensure road safety and adherence to the law with the long-term goal of developing a competent and responsible driver. Failure to address these violations appropriately could compromise public safety, lead to penalties for the learner, and damage the instructor's professional reputation and the reputation of their driving school. Careful judgment is required to determine the most effective and legally compliant intervention. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately and calmly addressing the specific minor violations with the learner driver. This approach involves pulling over safely when possible, explaining the nature of the infraction, e.g., a slightly early turn, a minor speed deviation, referencing the relevant Kildare Road Traffic Act provisions or general driving principles, and providing clear, constructive feedback on how to correct the behavior. This is correct because it directly addresses the immediate safety concern, reinforces learning in a practical context, and ensures compliance with the spirit and letter of road traffic laws in Kildare. It aligns with the ethical duty of a driving instructor to prioritize safety and to impart correct driving habits. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to ignore the minor violations, assuming they are insignificant and will resolve themselves as the learner gains experience. This is professionally unacceptable because it demonstrates a disregard for road safety and legal compliance. The Kildare Road Traffic Act mandates adherence to traffic laws at all times, and a driving instructor has a duty of care to ensure their student does not develop unsafe habits. Ignoring these issues could lead to the learner repeating them outside of lessons, potentially causing accidents or receiving penalty points. Another incorrect approach is to react with anger or excessive criticism towards the learner. This is professionally unacceptable as it can create anxiety and fear, hindering the learning process and potentially making the learner more prone to errors. While firm guidance is necessary, an aggressive response is counterproductive and unethical, failing to foster a supportive learning environment. It also does not provide the specific, actionable feedback required for improvement. A third incorrect approach is to immediately terminate the lesson and report the learner to the driving test center without prior discussion or attempt at correction. This is professionally unacceptable as it is an overreaction to minor infractions and does not align with the role of an instructor, which includes teaching and guiding. The focus should be on education and correction, not immediate punitive action for minor correctable errors. Such an action would be disproportionate and fail to uphold the instructor's duty to develop the learner's skills. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety, legal compliance, and effective pedagogy. This involves 1. Immediate assessment of the situation. Is there an immediate danger? 2. Calm and constructive communication. Address the issue directly and explain the reasoning. 3. Reference to relevant standards. Connect the feedback to Kildare driving regulations and best practices. 4. Graduated response. Start with guidance and correction, escalating only if the behavior persists or becomes dangerous. 5. Documentation if necessary. For significant or repeated issues, maintain records. Question 8. Market research demonstrates that some prospective drivers in Kildare are anxious about their upcoming driving tests and may seek assurances beyond standard preparation. A driving instructor in Kildare is approached by a client who, after a lesson, expresses significant worry about failing and asks if the instructor can have a word with the examiner or suggest ways to make a particularly good impression that might sway the examiner's decision. How should the Kildare driving instructor ethically and professionally respond to this client's request? Option A. Politely explain that their role is to prepare the client for the test according to Kildare Driver Testing Service guidelines and that they cannot influence the test outcome, emphasizing the importance of objective assessment. Option B. Agree to speak with the examiner before the test to subtly advocate for the client, suggesting specific maneuvers the client has practiced extensively. Option C. Advise the client to book their test for a specific day of the week when they believe examiners are generally less strict. Option D. Tell the client that they cannot help with this request and suggest the client find another instructor who might be willing to assist. The correct answer is A. Politely explain that their role is to prepare the client for the test according to Kildare Driver Testing Service guidelines, and that they cannot influence the test outcome, emphasizing the importance of objective assessment. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Kildare driving instructor due to the potential conflict between client satisfaction and adherence to the strict regulatory framework governing driving tests in Kildare. The instructor must navigate the client's desire for a specific outcome with the paramount importance of maintaining the integrity and fairness of the Kildare Driver Testing Service. Failure to do so could result in disciplinary action, damage to professional reputation, and undermine public trust in the testing process. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves politely but firmly explaining to the client that the driving instructor's role is to prepare them for the test according to the Kildare Driver Testing Service guidelines, and that they cannot influence the outcome of the test itself. This approach upholds the principles of fairness and impartiality mandated by the Kildare Driver Testing Service regulations. The instructor must emphasize that the test is designed to assess the applicant's ability to drive safely and competently, and that any attempt to influence the examiner would be a breach of these regulations and unethical. The instructor's responsibility is to provide objective instruction and feedback, not to guarantee a pass. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to agree to the client's request and subtly coach them on how to impress the examiner with specific maneuvers that are not necessarily indicative of overall safe driving, or to suggest ways to distract or mislead the examiner. This directly violates the Kildare Driver Testing Service's commitment to an objective and unbiased assessment of driving skills. It undermines the integrity of the testing process and could lead to unqualified drivers being licensed. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the client's concerns entirely without offering any reassurance or explanation of the instructor's role. While not directly unethical, this can lead to client dissatisfaction and a perception of unprofessionalism, potentially damaging the instructor's reputation. It fails to educate the client on the realities of the testing process and the instructor's ethical obligations. A further incorrect approach is to suggest that the client should book their test at a less busy time or with a specific examiner known to be more lenient. This implies an attempt to circumvent the standard testing procedures and could be interpreted as facilitating a less rigorous assessment, which is contrary to the spirit and letter of the Kildare Driver Testing Service regulation. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Kildare should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. When faced with client requests that could compromise these principles, the process should involve 1. Clearly understanding the relevant Kildare Driver Testing Service regulations and ethical codes of conduct. 2. Identifying the potential conflict between the client's request and these obligations. 3. Communicating clearly and professionally with the client, explaining the instructor's role and limitations and the importance of fair testing. 4. Offering constructive advice and support within the bounds of ethical practice. 5. Documenting any such interactions if they are significant. Question 9. Governance review demonstrates that a Kildare driving test examiner is considering how to assess an applicant who is a long-time resident and claims to be very familiar with the local roads and the specific test routes. The examiner is also aware that the applicant appears quite nervous. What is the most appropriate course of action for the examiner to take in Kildare? Option A. Waive certain driving maneuvers or route segments due to the applicant's stated familiarity with the local roads. Option B. Rely on a previous informal observation of the applicant's driving to certify their readiness for a license, bypassing the formal test. Option C. Shorten the driving test to accommodate the applicant's nervousness, assuming their familiarity with the area compensates for any missed elements. Option D. Conduct the full, standardized Kildare driving test as mandated by the Kildare Driver Licensing Act, ensuring all assessment criteria are met. The correct answer is D. Conduct the full, standardized Kildare driving test as mandated by the Kildare Driver Licensing Act, ensuring all assessment criteria are met. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate needs of a driver seeking a license with the overarching responsibility of ensuring road safety and adherence to the Kildare licensing regulations. the pressure to expedite the process, potentially due to the applicant's perceived urgency or the examiner's desire to be efficient, can create a conflict with the strict requirements of the Kildare Driver Licensing Act. Careful judgment is required to uphold the integrity of the licensing process without being unduly influenced by external factors. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves strictly adhering to the Kildare Driver Licensing Act's established procedures for assessing driving competency. This means conducting the full, standardized driving test as outlined in the Act, regardless of the applicant's perceived familiarity with the route or the examiner's personal knowledge of the applicant. This approach is correct because it ensures objective and consistent evaluation of all candidates, thereby upholding the public interest in road safety and preventing potential favoritism or bias. The Kildare Driver Licensing Act mandates a uniform testing standard for all applicants to ensure they possess the necessary skills and knowledge to operate a vehicle safely. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves waiving certain sections of the test based on the applicant's familiarity with the local roads. This is professionally unacceptable, as it bypasses the mandated assessment of specific driving skills and knowledge required by the Kildare Driver Licensing Act. It introduces subjectivity and potential bias, undermining the fairness and validity of the licensing process. Another incorrect approach is to shorten the test duration because the applicant appears nervous but otherwise competent. While empathy is important, the Kildare Driver Licensing Act does not permit subjective adjustments to the test based on an applicant's emotional state if they are still capable of demonstrating the required competencies. Shortening the test risks failing to assess critical driving behaviors or decision-making under pressure, which are essential components of safe driving as defined by the Act. A further incorrect approach is to rely on a previous, informal observation of the applicant's driving to certify their readiness for a license. This is professionally unacceptable because it deviates entirely from the formal assessment process established by the Kildare Driver Licensing Act. Informal observations lack the structured evaluation criteria and documentation required for official licensing decisions, and they do not constitute a valid assessment of current driving ability according to regulatory standards. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and public safety. This involves 1. Understanding and internalizing the specific requirements of the Kildare Driver Licensing Act. 2. Recognizing potential pressures or influences that might lead to deviations from the Act. 3. Applying the standardized assessment criteria objectively to every applicant. 4. Documenting the assessment process thoroughly, including any deviations and the rationale for them, though deviations from mandated procedures are generally not permissible. 5. Seeking guidance from supervisors or regulatory bodies if faced with ambiguous situations or pressure to compromise standards. The ultimate goal is to ensure that only individuals who meet the stringent safety standards set forth by the Kildare Driver Licensing Act are granted a license. Question 10. Stakeholder feedback indicates a need for greater clarity in pricing structures for driving lessons in Kildare. A driving instructor offers a package of 10 driving lessons for a total advertised price of euros 500. The instructor wishes to advertise a per lesson rate to attract new clients. If the instructor calculates the per lesson rate by simply dividing the total package price by the number of lessons, what is the correct per lesson rate? And what is the most transparent method to present this to a potential client in Kildare? Option A. The per lesson rate is euros 50, and this should be presented as the standard rate, with the euros 500 package being a discounted offer. Option B. The per lesson rate is euros 50, and this should be presented as derived from the total euros 500 package price for 10 lessons. Option C. The per lesson rate is euros 45, implying a discount from a standard euros 50 per lesson rate, and the total package price of euros 500 should be mentioned as a consequence of this discount. Option D. The per lesson rate is euros 50, and the total package price of euros 500 should be mentioned, but the calculation method for the per lesson rate is less important than the advertised rate. The correct answer is B. The per lesson rate is euros 50, and this should be presented as derived from the total euros 500 package price for 10 lessons. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Kildare driving instructor regarding the accurate calculation and communication of lesson costs. The challenge lies in balancing the need for clear financial transparency with the potential for misinterpretation of pricing structures, which could lead to disputes with clients and damage to the instructor's reputation. Adhering to Kildare's consumer protection laws and professional conduct guidelines is paramount. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves clearly stating the total cost of the package upfront, including any applicable taxes or fees, and then calculating the per lesson rate based on that total. This approach ensures that the client understands the full financial commitment from the outset. For example, if a 10-lesson package is advertised for Euros 500, the instructor should present this as the total price. The per lesson rate would then be calculated as // text per lesson rate equals /frac text total package price /text number of lessons // text per lesson rate equals /frac Euros 510 /text lessons equals Euros 50 / text lesson /. This method aligns with the principles of fair trading and consumer information requirements in Kildare, ensuring that advertised prices are not misleading and that clients are fully informed of the total cost before agreeing to services. Incorrect approaches analysis. Presenting a per lesson rate that is derived from a discounted package price without clearly stating the total package cost upfront is misleading. For instance, if the advertised rate is Euros 50 per lesson, but the package of 10 lessons is Euros 500, implying a Euros 5 discount per lesson, failing to explicitly state the Euros 500 total package price before calculating the per lesson rate can be seen as a failure to provide complete pricing information. This could violate consumer protection regulations in Kildare that mandate clear and unambiguous pricing. Another incorrect approach is to advertise a low per lesson rate and then add significant administrative or booking fees at the end, which were not clearly disclosed initially. This practice can be considered deceptive advertising and contravenes the spirit of transparent pricing. Finally, calculating the per lesson rate based on an estimated number of lessons rather than a fixed package price, and then charging the client for any additional lessons at a higher, non-discounted rate without prior explicit agreement, is also problematic. This lacks the certainty and transparency expected by consumers and could lead to disputes. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, accuracy, and adherence to regulatory requirements. This involves 1. Understanding the specific pricing and advertising regulations applicable in Kildare. 2. Clearly defining service packages and their total costs. 3. Calculating any per-unit rates based on the total package price. 4. Communicating all costs, including potential additional fees, in a clear and upfront manner to the client before any agreement is made. 5. Maintaining accurate records of all financial transactions and communications. Question 11. Market research demonstrates that some prospective drivers in Kildare believe they can pass the driver theory test by focusing only on the most commonly tested topics, suggesting to their instructors that certain sections of the official syllabus can be omitted from their preparation. As a Kildare driver instructor, how should you respond to a client who proposes skipping specific modules of the driver theory test syllabus to focus on what they perceive as more critical areas? Option A. Inform the client that they can likely pass by focusing on the main topics and advise them to guess or bluff their way through the less emphasized sections. Option B. Explain that the Kildare driver theory test syllabus, as set by the Road Safety Authority, is comprehensive and all sections must be covered to ensure adequate preparation and a successful test outcome. Option C. Agree to the client's request and tailor the lessons to cover only the topics they believe are most important, assuming they have some prior knowledge. Option D. Politely decline to cover certain sections but offer no further explanation, leaving the client to figure out the importance of the omitted material. Correct answer is B. Explain that the Kildare driver theory test syllabus, as set by the Road Safety Authority, is comprehensive and all sections must be covered to ensure adequate preparation and a successful test outcome. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Kildare driver instructor due to the potential conflict between client satisfaction and adherence to the strict requirements of the Kildare driver theory test syllabus. The instructor must navigate the client's desire for a shortcut with the ethical and regulatory obligation to ensure the client is fully prepared according to the official curriculum. Failure to do so could result in the client failing the test, potentially leading to complaints, and more importantly, a failure to uphold the standards set by the Road Safety Authority, RSA, for driver education in Kildare. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves directly addressing the client's request by explaining that the Kildare driver theory test syllabus, as mandated by the RSA, does not permit skipping any sections. The instructor must clearly communicate that comprehensive knowledge of all topics is essential for passing the test and for safe driving. This approach aligns with the instructor's professional duty to provide accurate and complete instruction, ensuring the client meets the regulatory requirements for obtaining a learner permit. It prioritizes the integrity of the testing process and the safety of the public on Kildare's roads. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves agreeing to the client's request and focusing only on the topics they deem important. This is professionally unacceptable because it directly violates the RSA's mandated syllabus for the Kildare driver theory test. It demonstrates a disregard for regulatory compliance and an abdication of the instructor's responsibility to prepare the client thoroughly, potentially leading to the client's failure and a breach of professional ethics. Another incorrect approach is to simply tell the client they cannot skip sections without providing a clear explanation of why. It avoids directly violating the syllabus. It lacks the professional communication and client education necessary. This can lead to client dissatisfaction and a perception of inflexibility without reinforcing the importance of the comprehensive curriculum for road safety in Kildare. A further incorrect approach is to suggest that the client might be able to guess or bluff their way through the omitted sections. This is highly unprofessional and unethical. It undermines the purpose of the theory test, which is to assess genuine knowledge and understanding, and promotes dishonest practices. It also fails to acknowledge the serious implications of inadequate preparation for road safety in Kildare. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Kildare, when faced with client requests that conflict with regulatory requirements, should employ a framework that prioritizes transparency, education, and adherence to established standards. This involves 1. Understanding the specific regulatory framework, RSA syllabus for Kildare driver theory test. 2. Clearly communicating the requirements to the client, explaining the rationale behind them, e.g., safety, legal compliance. 3. Offering solutions within the regulatory boundaries, such as tailored study plans or additional practice sessions on challenging topics. 4. Maintaining professional integrity by refusing to compromise on essential standards, even if it means potentially losing a client. Question 12. Benchmark analysis indicates that a client preparing for the Kildare driver theory test expresses a strong desire to focus only on the sections they perceive as most relevant to their immediate driving needs, suggesting that other parts of the syllabus are less important and can be glossed over to save time. As a Kildare driving instructor, what is the most appropriate professional response to this client's request? Option A. Advise the client that they can independently research and learn the remaining topics outside of the scheduled lessons to save instructional time. Option B. Prioritize the client's perceived needs and focus instruction exclusively on the topics they deem most important, omitting sections they consider less relevant. Option C. Agree to skip certain sections of the syllabus that the client finds less important to expedite the preparation process and reduce the overall cost. Option D. Clearly explain the necessity of covering the entire Kildare driver theory test syllabus as mandated, and commit to delivering comprehensive instruction on all topics, while seeking ways to make the entire curriculum engaging. Correct answer is D. Clearly explain the necessity of covering the entire Kildare driver theory test syllabus as mandated, and commit to delivering comprehensive instruction on all topics, while seeking ways to make the entire curriculum engaging. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Kildare driving instructor due to the potential conflict between client satisfaction and adherence to the strict requirements of the Kildare driver theory test syllabus. The instructor must navigate the client's desire for a shortcut with the ethical and regulatory obligation to ensure the client is fully prepared according to the official curriculum. Failure to do so could result in the client failing the test, potentially leading to complaints, and more importantly, compromising road safety. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves clearly explaining to the client that the Kildare driver theory test syllabus is comprehensive and designed to cover all essential knowledge for safe driving. The instructor should emphasize that while certain areas might seem less relevant to the client's immediate driving experience, they are crucial for understanding road rules, hazard perception, and legal responsibilities. The instructor must then commit to covering the entire syllabus thoroughly, perhaps by tailoring the delivery to make less intuitive topics more engaging, but without omitting any content. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the regulatory requirement to prepare candidates according to the official Kildare driver theory test syllabus, ensuring they possess the necessary knowledge for safe driving and to pass the examination. It upholds professional integrity and the duty of care owed to both the client and the public. Incorrect approach is analysis, focusing solely on the topics the client believes are most important, while omitting others, is professionally unacceptable. This approach violates the regulatory framework of the Kildare driver theory test by failing to cover the entire prescribed syllabus. It prioritizes client convenience over competence and road safety, potentially leaving the client unprepared for critical aspects of driving law and hazard awareness. Suggesting that the client can figure out the remaining topics independently without direct instruction is also professionally unsound. This abdicates the instructor's responsibility to provide comprehensive training as mandated by the syllabus. It creates a knowledge gap that could have serious consequences for the client's ability to drive safely and legally. Agreeing to skip certain sections of the syllabus to save time is a direct contravention of the regulatory requirements for the Kildare driver theory test. This approach prioritizes expediency over thoroughness and safety, undermining the purpose of the test and the instructor's professional obligations. It exposes the client to the risk of failing the test. More importantly, to the dangers of incomplete knowledge on the road. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and client safety above all else. When faced with a client request that conflicts with these principles, the professional should first clearly articulate the regulatory requirements and the rationale behind them. They should then explain the potential risks and consequences of deviating from the prescribed curriculum. The decision should always be to adhere to the syllabus, while exploring pedagogical strategies to make the learning process effective and engaging for the client. This ensures both professional integrity and the client's successful and safe preparation for the Kildare driver theory test. Question 13. Market research demonstrates that many prospective drivers in Kildare are eager to pass their driver theory test with minimal delay. As a Kildare-based approved driving instructor ADDI, you have a client who expresses a strong desire to focus only on topics they believe are most likely to appear on the test, suggesting they can skip certain sections of the official syllabus to save time. How should you best approach this situation to ensure both client satisfaction and professional integrity? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive assessment of the client's knowledge against the entire Kildare driver theory test syllabus and develop a tailored learning plan to address any identified gaps, ensuring all mandatory topics are covered. Option B. Agree to the client's request and focus only on the topics they believe are most important, aiming for a quicker completion of their preparation. Option C. Assume the client's previous driving experience in another country means they have sufficient knowledge of Irish road rules, and offer only a brief overview of Kildare-specific regulations. Option D. Provide the client with a generic set of driving theory notes and recommend they study them independently, with minimal direct instruction. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive assessment of the client's knowledge against the entire Kildare driver theory test syllabus and develop a tailored learning plan to address any identified gaps, ensuring all mandatory topics are covered. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Kildare driver instructor due to the potential conflict between a client's perceived needs and the strict requirements of the Kildare driver theory test syllabus. The instructor must balance client satisfaction with the ethical and legal obligation to prepare the client adequately for the official test, ensuring they possess the necessary knowledge to drive safely and responsibly on Irish roads. Misjudging this balance could lead to a client failing the test, potentially causing financial loss and reputational damage to the instructor, or worse, the client passing without adequate knowledge, posing a risk to public safety. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough assessment of the client's current understanding against the official Kildare driver theory test syllabus. This approach prioritizes adherence to the established curriculum, ensuring all mandatory topics are covered comprehensively. The instructor should then tailor their teaching methods to address any identified gaps in the client's knowledge, using resources that directly reflect the content and style of the official test. This is correct because it aligns with the regulatory framework governing driver training in Ireland, which mandates preparation for the official theory test as outlined by the Road Safety Authority, RSA. Ethically, it upholds the instructor's duty of care to both the client and the public by ensuring the client is genuinely prepared for the responsibilities of driving. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves solely focusing on the client's stated desire to pass quickly, potentially skipping sections of the syllabus deemed less important by the client. This is professionally unacceptable as it deviates from the mandated curriculum, failing to ensure the client has a complete understanding of all road safety rules and regulations pertinent to Kildare. This breaches the instructor's obligation to prepare the client for the official test as prescribed by the RSA. Another incorrect approach is to rely exclusively on generic online resources or outdated materials that may not accurately reflect the current Kildare driver theory test syllabus. This is problematic because the syllabus can be updated, and generic resources may not cover the specific nuances or emphasis of the official Irish test. This failure to use up-to-date, jurisdiction-specific materials is a regulatory oversight and an ethical lapse in providing competent instruction. A further incorrect approach would be to assume the client's prior driving experience in another country automatically translates to full knowledge of Kildare's road rules, and therefore to offer minimal instruction. This is a significant professional failing. Each jurisdiction has unique traffic laws, signage, and driving practices. Without a specific assessment against the Kildare driver theory test syllabus, this approach risks leaving critical knowledge gaps, which is both a regulatory noncompliance and an ethical failure to adequately prepare the client. Professional reasoning. Professionals in driver instruction in Kildare should adopt a systematic approach. First, they must familiarize themselves thoroughly with the current Kildare driver theory test syllabus provided by the RSA. Second, they should conduct an initial assessment of the client's knowledge base, ideally through a diagnostic test or detailed discussion. Third, based on this assessment, they should develop a personalized training plan that systematically covers all syllabus topics, prioritizing areas of weakness. Throughout the training, they should use official or highly reputable resources that mirror the test format and content. Regular progress checks and feedback are crucial. The ultimate goal is not just to pass the test, but to ensure the client becomes a safe and knowledgeable driver, adhering to all Irish road traffic legislation. Question 14. Market research demonstrates that many aspiring drivers in Kildare are eager to begin practical driving lessons immediately upon expressing interest. A driving instructor in Kildare is approached by a prospective student who claims to be almost ready to drive and wants to start practicing maneuvers that are typically part of the Kildare driving test. The instructor has not yet seen any official documentation from the student. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for the driving instructor in Kildare? Option A. Verify that the student possesses a valid Kildare learner's permit before commencing any practical driving instruction on public roads. Option B. Advise the student to practice with a family member until they have obtained their learner's permit and then resume lessons. Option C. Begin teaching advanced maneuvers as requested, assuming the student's eagerness indicates they are prepared and will obtain their permit shortly. Option D. Provide basic vehicle familiarization on private property, as this does not require a learner's permit according to Kildare regulations. Correct answer is A. Verify that the student possesses a valid Kildare learner's permit before commencing any practical driving instruction on public roads. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Kildare driving instructor due to the potential conflict between a student's perceived readiness and the legal requirements for obtaining a learner's permit in Kildare. The instructor must balance their duty of care to the student and the public with the student's eagerness to progress, all while adhering strictly to Kildare's Road Traffic Act and associated regulations. Misjudging this situation could lead to legal repercussions for the instructor and, more importantly, compromise road safety. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves ensuring the student has met all statutory requirements for a learner's permit before any instruction that could be construed as preparation for the driving test. This means verifying the student possesses a valid learner's permit issued under Kildare law, which is a prerequisite for undertaking any driving instruction beyond basic vehicle familiarization. The instructor must confirm the permit is current and valid for the type of vehicle being used. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the Kildare Road Traffic Act, which mandates that a person must hold a learner permit before undertaking driving instruction or driving on public roads. It upholds the legal framework designed to ensure new drivers have a foundational understanding and are legally permitted to learn. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with instruction that simulates test conditions or covers advanced maneuvers before the student has a valid learner's permit. This is a regulatory failure, as it contravenes the spirit and letter of the Kildare Road Traffic Act, which separates the initial learner permit acquisition from the subsequent stages of driving education. It also poses an ethical risk by potentially exposing the student and others to danger by practicing on public roads without the necessary legal authorization and a fully qualified supervisor, if applicable. Another incorrect approach is to assume the student's confidence or prior experience equates to legal eligibility. Relying on such assumptions without verifying the learner's permit status is a direct violation of Kildare's licensing regulations. This approach ignores the formal, legal process established for driver training and licensing, prioritizing expediency over compliance and safety. A further incorrect approach is to provide instruction that could be interpreted as preparation for the driving test, such as practicing specific test routes or maneuvers, even if the student has a permit but has not yet completed the mandatory pre-test training or met other Kildare-specific requirements. This could be seen as circumventing the intended progression of driver education as outlined by Kildare's licensing authorities, potentially leading to a student taking the test before they are truly ready or legally permitted to do so. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Kildare should adopt a systematic decision-making process. First, always verify legal prerequisites. In this case, confirm the existence and validity of a Kildare learner's permit. Second, understand the scope of permissible instruction at each stage of the licensing process as defined by Kildare law. Third, prioritize student safety and public road safety above all else. Fourth, maintain clear communication with the student about legal requirements and the learning progression. Finally, consult official Kildare licensing guidelines or authorities if any ambiguity arises regarding regulations. Question 15. Process analysis reveals a licensing agent in Kildare is processing a driver's license application where the client is eager to complete the process quickly. The client presents a utility bill for proof of address, but the agent notices the name on the bill is slightly different from the name on the client's identification, though the address is identical. The agent is aware of the Kildare Driver Licensing Authority's strict guidelines regarding documentation verification. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing agent in Kildare? Option A. Process the application but flag the discrepancy for later review by a supervisor, assuming the client is being truthful. Option B. Inform the client that the discrepancy is too significant and reject the application outright without further investigation. Option C. Meticulously verify the utility bill and identification against the Kildare Driver Licensing Authority's specific guidelines for acceptable proof of address and identity, potentially requesting additional supporting documentation if discrepancies exist. Option D. Accept the utility bill as valid proof of address, given the identical address, and proceed with the application to accommodate the client's urgency. The correct answer is C. Meticulously verify the utility bill and identification against the Kildare Driver Licensing Authority's specific guidelines for acceptable proof of address and identity, potentially requesting additional supporting documentation if discrepancies exist. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate needs of a client with the strict regulatory requirements of the Kildare Driver Licensing Authority. The client's desire for expediency must be weighed against the legal obligation to ensure all necessary documentation and procedures are followed to prevent fraudulent or improper licensing. Failure to adhere to these regulations can result in penalties for the licensing agent and compromise the integrity of the driver licensing system in Kildare. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously verifying all submitted documentation against the Kildare driver licensing authorities' established guidelines for proof of identity and residency. This includes cross-referencing information, checking for authenticity, and ensuring all required fields are completed accurately. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the regulatory framework established by the Kildare Driver Licensing Authority, which mandates thorough verification to maintain the integrity of the licensing process and prevent the issuance of licenses to unqualified individuals. Adhering to these specific Kildare regulations is paramount. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves accepting the client's assurance that the documents are valid without independent verification. This fails to meet the Kildare Driver Licensing Authority's requirement for due diligence and opens the door to potential fraud, violating the spirit and letter of the regulations. Another incorrect approach is to proceed with processing the application based on a partial understanding of the required documentation, assuming the missing pieces are less critical. This demonstrates a lack of attention to detail and a disregard for the comprehensive nature of the Kildare Driver Licensing Authority's requirements, which are designed to ensure all necessary criteria are met. A further incorrect approach is to prioritize the client's urgency over regulatory compliance by expediting the process without completing all verification steps. This prioritizes customer service over legal obligation and risks issuing a license improperly, which is a direct contravention of the Kildare Driver Licensing Authority's mandate. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should employ a systematic checklist approach, ensuring each Kildare Driver Licensing Authority requirement is met before proceeding. They should be trained to identify red flags in documentation and know the established protocols for escalating suspicious cases. A commitment to regulatory adherence, coupled with clear communication with the client about the process and timelines, is essential for maintaining professional integrity and compliance with Kildare's specific licensing laws. Question 16. Cost-benefit analysis shows that immediate, detailed feedback on minor traffic violations during driving lessons in Kildare is more effective for long-term safety than delayed or infrequent correction. Considering the Road Safety Authority (RSA) guidelines for driver education in Ireland, which approach best balances the instructor's duty of care with the learner's educational needs. Option A. Immediately and calmly address each minor violation as it occurs, explaining the rule broken, potential consequences, and demonstrating the correct procedure. Option B. Adopt a stern and critical tone when pointing out minor violations to emphasize their seriousness. Option C. Wait until the end of the lesson to provide a comprehensive list of all minor violations observed. Option D. Ignore minor violations during the lesson, assuming the learner will eventually correct their habits through experience. The correct answer is A. Immediately and calmly address each minor violation as it occurs, explaining the rule broken, potential consequences, and demonstrating the correct procedure. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Kildare driving instructor regarding the appropriate handling of a learner driver's persistent, minor traffic violations during lessons. The instructor must balance the need to provide comprehensive training, ensure public safety, and adhere to the Road Safety Authority (RSA) guidelines for driver education in Ireland. Failure to address these violations appropriately could lead to the learner developing unsafe driving habits, potentially resulting in future accidents or contraventions, and could also reflect poorly on the instructor's professional standards and the credibility of their training. Careful judgment is required to determine the most effective and compliant method of intervention. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately and calmly addressing each minor violation as it occurs, explaining the specific rule broken, the potential consequences, and demonstrating the correct procedure. This approach is correct because it aligns directly with the RSA's emphasis on building a strong foundation of safe driving practices from the outset. Continuous, real-time feedback is crucial for effective learning and habit formation. By addressing each instance, the instructor reinforces the importance of adherence to traffic laws and provides immediate corrective guidance, which is the most effective way to prevent the learner from normalizing unsafe behavior. This proactive and instructive method ensures the learner understands the immediate implications of their actions and learns to anticipate and avoid similar errors in the future, fulfilling the instructor's duty of care and the requirements of professional driver training in Kildare. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to ignore minor violations with the assumption that the learner will eventually pick up the correct habits, or that they are not significant enough to warrant interruption. This is professionally unacceptable because it fails to provide essential corrective feedback, potentially allowing the learner to solidify unsafe driving practices. The RSA's guidelines implicitly require instructors to actively teach and reinforce safe driving, not to passively observe. Another incorrect approach is to wait until the end of the lesson to address all the accumulated minor violations. While consolidating feedback can be useful for broader themes, addressing minor infractions only at the end deprives the learner of the immediate learning opportunity. The impact of the mistake is diminished by the delay, and the learner may not fully connect the feedback to the specific action they took, making it less effective for immediate behavioral correction and potentially leading to repeated errors in the same lesson. A third incorrect approach is to become overly critical or to scold the learner for minor mistakes. While firm guidance is necessary, an overly negative or aggressive tone can create anxiety and hinder the learning process. The RSA promotes a supportive and encouraging learning environment. Excessive criticism can make the learner fearful of making any mistakes, which can paradoxically lead to hesitation and less confident driving, or even a reluctance to ask for clarification, ultimately undermining the effectiveness of the training. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Kildare should adopt a structured approach to feedback. This involves 1. Active observation to identify all driving behaviors, both correct and incorrect. 2. Immediate calm and constructive intervention for any observed violation, explaining the what, why, and how of the correct action. 3. Reinforcing positive behaviors to build confidence. 4. Periodically summarizing key learning points, but ensuring that immediate corrections are prioritized for immediate impact. This framework ensures that learning is continuous, effective, and aligned with regulatory expectations for safe and competent driver development. Question 17. The monitoring system demonstrates that the indicator light for the rear left turn signal on your delivery van in Kildare Province has been intermittently malfunctioning for the past 2 days. You have a critical delivery scheduled across town within the next hour, and delaying the delivery could result in a significant penalty from the client. Considering the potential consequences of both delay and operating with a faulty safety signal, which of the following actions best upholds your professional responsibilities and compliance with Kildare provincial road safety regulations? Option A. Proceed with the delivery as scheduled, hoping the turn signal functions correctly when needed and addressing it after the delivery is complete. Option B. Attempt to fix the indicator light yourself using readily available tools and materials before starting the delivery to save time. Option C. Immediately report the intermittent turn signal malfunction to your supervisor and request immediate repair or a replacement vehicle, even if it means a slight delay to your delivery. Option D. Continue with the delivery but use hand signals extensively to compensate for the faulty turn signal, assuming this is sufficient to alert other drivers. The correct answer is C. Immediately report the intermittent turn signal malfunction to your supervisor and request immediate repair or a replacement vehicle, even if it means a slight delay to your delivery. Explanation. The monitoring system demonstrates a potential lapse in adherence to the Kildare Provincial Road Safety Act, specifically concerning the proper maintenance and reporting of vehicle safety equipment. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the driver to balance immediate operational needs with long-term compliance and public safety obligations. The driver must make a judgment call that could impact their ability to work, the safety of others, and their legal standing. The best approach involves prioritizing safety and compliance by immediately addressing the faulty indicator light. This aligns with the Kildare Provincial Road Safety Act's emphasis on ensuring all vehicle safety features are operational before operating a vehicle on public roads. The Act implicitly requires drivers to be proactive in identifying and rectifying any defects that could compromise road safety. Reporting the issue to a supervisor and arranging for prompt repair, even if it causes a minor delay, upholds the driver's responsibility to maintain their vehicle in a roadworthy condition and demonstrates a commitment to the spirit and letter of the law. This proactive stance prevents potential accidents and avoids penalties associated with operating a vehicle with known safety defects. An incorrect approach involves ignoring the faulty indicator light and continuing with the delivery route. This directly contravenes the Kildare Provincial Road Safety Act's requirement for vehicles to be in a safe operating condition. The indicator light is a critical safety feature, and its malfunction could lead to misunderstandings with other road users, potentially causing accidents. Furthermore, continuing to operate the vehicle with a known defect could result in fines and demerit points under provincial law. Another incorrect approach is to attempt a temporary, unauthorized fix without proper assessment or reporting. While seemingly efficient, this bypasses established safety protocols and the Act's implied requirement for qualified maintenance. An improper fix could mask the underlying problem, leading to a more serious failure later, or could itself create a new hazard. It also fails to create a proper record of the defect and its rectification, which is crucial for ongoing vehicle maintenance and accountability under provincial regulations. The professional reasoning process for such situations should involve a clear hierarchy of priorities: safety first, then legal compliance, followed by operational efficiency. When a safety-related issue is identified, the immediate step should be to cease operation or prevent operation until the issue is resolved by qualified personnel. This should be followed by thorough reporting according to company policy and provincial regulations. If there is any doubt about the safety or legality of operating a vehicle, the default decision should always be to err on the side of caution and seek expert advice or repair. Question 18. During the evaluation of a driver's license application at a Kildare Driver Licensing Authority office, a client presents a photocopy of their passport and a utility bill, stating that the originals are at home and that these copies are identical. The client is in a hurry and insists that the photocopies should be sufficient. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing officer? Option A. Accept the photocopied documents, as the client has stated they are identical to the originals. Option B. Accept the photocopied documents and make a note to request the originals at a later date. Option C. Advise the client to visit another Kildare licensing office that might be more lenient with documentation requirements. Option D. Politely explain that the Kildare Driver Licensing Authority regulations require original documents for proof of identity and residency, and that the application cannot proceed without them. The correct answer is D. Politely explain that the Kildare Driver Licensing Authority regulations require original documents for proof of identity and residency, and that the application cannot proceed without them. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate needs of a client with the strict regulatory requirements of the Kildare Driver Licensing Authority. The client's desire for expediency clashes with the legal obligation to ensure all necessary documentation and procedures are followed to prevent fraudulent or improper licensing. Careful judgment is required to uphold the integrity of the licensing system while still providing a reasonable level of service. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves politely but firmly explaining to the client that the Kildare Driver Licensing Authority's regulations mandate the submission of the original, valid proof of identity and residency. This approach upholds the regulatory framework by adhering to the specified documentation requirements, ensuring the integrity of the licensing process, and preventing potential breaches of Kildare law. It prioritizes compliance and the legal mandate over the client's immediate convenience. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to accept a photocopy of the client's passport and a utility bill, even if the client insists they are identical to the originals. This fails to comply with the Kildare Driver Licensing Authority's explicit requirement for original documents, potentially allowing for fraudulent applications and undermining the authority's control over licensing. It also bypasses the established verification procedures. Another incorrect approach is to suggest the client visit a different Kildare licensing office that might be less strict. This is unprofessional and unethical, as it attempts to circumvent the established regulations and potentially shifts the burden of noncompliance to another part of the authority. It also fails to educate the client on the correct procedure. A further incorrect approach is to process the application with the photocopied documents and make a note to follow up later for the originals. This is a direct violation of Kildare Driver Licensing Authority regulations. It creates a significant risk of issuing a license based on incomplete and unverified information, which could have serious legal and safety implications. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making process that prioritizes regulatory compliance. This involves understanding the specific requirements of the Kildare Driver Licensing Authority, clearly communicating these requirements to the client, and explaining the rationale behind them. When faced with client resistance, the professional should remain firm in their adherence to the law, offering alternative solutions that are within the regulatory framework, such as advising the client on how to obtain original documents or reschedule their appointment. The ultimate goal is to ensure all licensing is conducted legally and ethically, protecting both the public and the integrity of the licensing body. Question 19. What factors determine the appropriate level of scrutiny and assessment for a driver's license applicant during their practical driving test in Kildare, considering the applicant is known to the licensing officer? Option A. The licensing officer's objective assessment of the applicant's driving skills and knowledge against the Kildare Driver's Handbook and established testing protocols. Option B. The licensing officer's personal relationship with the applicant, leading to a more lenient application of the testing procedures. Option C. The perceived efficiency gains from shortening the practical test due to the applicant's familiarity with the licensing officer. Option D. The applicants expressed confidence in their driving abilities and their familiarity with the general testing area. Correct answer is A. The licensing officer's objective assessment of the applicant's driving skills and knowledge against the Kildare Driver's Handbook and established testing protocols. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate needs of a driver seeking a license with the overarching public safety mandate of the Kildare Department of Motor Vehicles, DMV. A licensing officer must exercise sound judgment to ensure that only qualified individuals are granted driving privileges, thereby protecting all road users. The pressure to process applications efficiently must not compromise the integrity of the licensing process. The best approach involves a thorough and objective assessment of the applicant's driving skills and knowledge, strictly adhering to the Kildare Driver's Handbook and the established testing protocols. This means conducting the full practical driving test as outlined by the Kildare DMV, regardless of the applicant's perceived confidence or the officer's personal familiarity with the applicant. This approach is correct because it directly fulfills the regulatory requirement of demonstrating competency before licensure, ensuring public safety, and upholding the fairness of the licensing system. It aligns with the ethical obligation of the licensing officer to act in the public interest. An approach that bypasses parts of the practical test due to a personal acquaintance with the applicant is ethically flawed and violates regulatory guidelines. It introduces bias and undermines the principle of equal application of the law. This could lead to an unqualified driver being licensed, posing a direct risk to public safety and potentially leading to accidents, which would be a severe dereliction of duty. Another incorrect approach, that of solely relying on the applicant's self-assessment of their driving ability without a practical demonstration, is fundamentally contrary to the purpose of a driving test. The test exists precisely because self-assessment is often unreliable and insufficient to guarantee safe driving practices. This failure to conduct a practical assessment directly contravenes the Kildare DMV's mandate to verify driving competence. Finally, an approach that prioritizes speed of processing over thoroughness, by shortening the test based on the applicant's perceived familiarity with the testing route, is also unacceptable. While efficiency is desirable, it cannot come at the expense of the core safety objective. This approach risks overlooking critical driving errors that might occur on less familiar sections of the route or in different traffic conditions, thereby compromising the licensing standards. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. This involves understanding the specific requirements of the Kildare Driver's Handbook and DMV procedures, recognizing potential conflicts of interest or pressures, and consistently applying objective assessment criteria. When faced with situations that might tempt deviation from protocol, professionals should remind themselves of their duty to public safety and the integrity of the licensing process. If unsure, seeking guidance from a supervisor or consulting the relevant regulations is always the prudent course of action. Question 20. Quality control measures reveal a discrepancy in the recorded vehicle usage for a commercial vehicle licensed in Kildare. The licensing department's records indicate 50,000 kilometers driven in the past year, while the applicant's submitted logs suggest only 35,000 kilometers. Based on Kildare's commercial vehicle licensing fee structure, Each kilometer over 40,000 kilometers incurs an additional charge of euros 0.15. If the applicant's logs are accurate, what is the maximum potential reduction in the additional fees that could be claimed, assuming the initial assessment was based on the 50,000 kilometers? Option A. The maximum potential reduction in additional fees is euros 3,000. Option B. The maximum potential reduction in additional fees is euros 750. Option C. The maximum potential reduction in additional fees is euros 250. Option D. The maximum potential reduction in additional fees is euros 500. The correct answer is D. The maximum potential reduction in additional fees is euros 500. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the Kildare County Council's licensing department to balance the need for accurate record keeping and fee collection with the potential for administrative error and the impact on a small business owner. The discrepancy in recorded vehicle usage versus actual usage, coupled with the potential for a significant financial penalty, necessitates a thorough and fair investigation that adheres strictly to Kildare's licensing regulations. The department must avoid both overpenalizing the applicant and undercollecting legitimate fees. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a detailed reconciliation of the data. This approach requires the licensing officer to first acknowledge the applicant's claim and then undertake a systematic review of all available records. This includes cross-referencing the submitted mileage logs with the vehicle's service history, any available GPS data, if applicable and legally obtainable, and previous licensing records for the vehicle. If a discrepancy persists after this thorough review, the officer should then calculate the potential fee difference based on the most conservative interpretation of the regulations that still aligns with the evidence. The applicant should then be formally notified of the findings and the proposed adjustment, with a clear explanation of the calculation and the regulatory basis, and be given an opportunity to provide further evidence or clarification before any final decision is made. This method ensures compliance with Kildare's licensing laws by prioritizing accuracy, fairness, and due process for the applicant. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately impose the maximum penalty based solely on the initial discrepancy without further investigation. This fails to uphold the principle of natural justice and the regulatory requirement for evidence-based decision-making. It assumes guilt without due diligence and could lead to an unlawful penalty. Another incorrect approach is to accept the applicant's explanation at face value and waive any potential additional fees, even if the initial records suggest a significant underpayment. This risks undercollecting revenue that is legitimately due to Kildare County Council, potentially violating financial regulations and the principle of equitable fee collection. A third incorrect approach is to delay the decision indefinitely without communicating with the applicant or undertaking any further investigation. This demonstrates a lack of diligence and can create uncertainty and hardship for the applicant, while also failing to fulfill the department's responsibility to process applications and collect fees in a timely manner. Professional reasoning. Professionals in licensing departments must adopt a systematic and evidence-based approach. This involves 1. Understanding the specific regulations governing vehicle licensing and fee structures in Kildare. 2. Acknowledging and investigating all claims made by applicants. 3. Employing data reconciliation techniques to verify information. 4. Applying penalties or adjustments only after a thorough review and with clear justification based on the regulations. 5. Communicating findings and decisions clearly and transparently to the applicant, providing opportunities for response. This structured process ensures fairness, accuracy, and compliance with legal and ethical obligations.